I will be covering an event where University of Ottawa professor Janice Fiamengo answers questions after her lecture What's Wrong with Women's Studies at the University of Toronto in March 2013. I know it's a long time ago, but I still wanted to cover this. And for anyone who is unaware and haven't seen my series about feminism, Fiamengo is a MRA who is also political in other ways that isn't really relevant in his context, so anyone can check that for themselves if they want to. So here we go.
My question is, could we please recognize the oppression that exists in our society when it comes to women?
No. Sorry, dude. I won't give in to your delusion of recognizing oppression for a group of people that have superior rights in your country. To say that the only group of people who have all rights in your country is somehow an oppressed class is monumentally stupid.
And how that the system that's been built, but in our society for thousands of years have been by men.
If society is built by men, then it's not built for men if women have superior rights, as I just stated.
It wasn't until 40 or 50 years ago that they couldn't get to vote.
Men only got the right to vote a short time before women got, at the cost of being drafted. Which means that you're only allowed to vote if you go to war on the government's demand, and that would most likely die as a result of that. I'd rather not vote than go to war. Force someone to do something is more oppressive than prevent them from doing something. I mean, rape is worse than forbidding someone from having sex.
We should. That was the question. Can we recognize oppression for women?
Yes, we do. Thanks.
I wouldn't say they're entirely wrong because there are certainly disadvantages for women in your societies, but that does not elevate to oppression. Because if it did, then men would be even more oppressed.
I'm a Ryerson social work student, a damn proud feminist.
Yeah, I can kind of see that. Sorry, I had to. This guy seems to be pretty reasonable though. Just wait for it.
And my program's 90% women, and I can personally say I've never felt under attack as a man ever.
Well, as you are part of an ideology who reject the possibility, I am worried that you might be. Regardless, only because you haven't doesn't mean other guys haven't either. I'm not implying that's what you think, even though many in your ideology does. At your school, do believe that, as one can see there. Oh, and by the way, this extends to women. One woman does not victimize all women. In STEM fields, perhaps?
My question, I just want to repeat the gentleman over there's question, is this men's movement, which seems to extort the values of equality so much, what they're doing to recognize the inequality among men on lines of race, ability, and other things like that. Because all men are not equal, unfortunately.
RSU policy now prohibits the formation of any group which does not center women's voices in the struggle for gender equity, equality of outcome, not equality of opportunity. I know what this basically translates into, and please correct me if I'm wrong. All advocacy on behalf of any interest group have to be gynocentric, which ignores every single issue for disabled people, homosexual, ethnic minorities that primarily affect men. Because if the issue primarily affects men, you cannot approach it gynocentric. Because that won't solve the problem, so the only way to still have the gynocentric lens, which feminists demand, you have to ignore those issues. If we are going to talk about ability issues, reproductive rights, you can't talk about that. Sexual issues for the disabled, you can't talk about that. Homosexual issues, reproductive rights, you can't talk about that. Anti-gay violence, you can't talk about that. Perhaps there are some issues for black people face. Police brutality, can't talk about that. Unlawful imprisonment, can't talk about that. Loss of contact with one's children, can't talk about that. Gang violence, you can't talk about that. What about other ethnic groups, like First Nations? Substance abuse, can't talk about that. How about Asians? Does Asians need to prestige higher to get the same education? No, you can't talk about that. Tell me, are we going to solve an issue that primarily affects men by primarily focusing on women? No, we won't. That's just common sense.
That's something that a spokesperson for Cafe may want to deal with, and I'm sure they're very happy to talk to you about that. It's really outside the parameters of what I was talking about. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks.
Good question.
I agree that this was a good question and that he was well-meaning, and Cafe have actually tried to talk about issues faced by specifically First Nations men. But the feminists had a problem with it. That deserves a video in of itself.
My name is Sheena. I'm a student at McGill University. And yeah, I just have a few questions about some of the claims that you made in your talk, and also one of the claims that's made in the description for the event. So in your talk, you seem to suggest that women's studies as a discipline is invoking a specter of inequality by calling class, race, gender into question in order to preserve its existence as a discipline. And so, you frame it as being like an active attempt to find inequalities.
Well, yeah, that's basically exactly what gender studies is.
So I would argue that you don't have to actively attempt to find inequality. So there's much empirical evidence. So I'll just, off the top of my head, name some of this empirical evidence. So like in our parliaments right now, just under 25% of the members of parliament are female identified in a nation with more than 50% women.
What the fuck does female identified even mean? Everyone is born either male or female, and some people have to transition to the other gender. Very simple. Don't try to sound smart with your gender studies degree. Canada's insane PM even hired 50% women in his cabinet, despite their qualifications. So the empirical evidence proved the opposite of your point.
I go to McGill University, and our Arts Undergraduate Society, which is comprised of almost 60% women.
Excuse me, you have 45 seconds.
Yep, I know.
Please get to the question.
Yep. I'm getting to the question. So our Arts Undergraduate Society, which is comprised of 60% women, only has 1 out of 7 executive members as women. So there's much empirical evidence. I can literally go on and on for hours about the empirical evidence that demonstrates the lack of equality. So I wonder how you can substantiate your arguments that there is a lack of inequality empirically, as you suggest in your talk.
There is a difference between inequality and inequity. Whenever it's a meritocracy, it doesn't have to represent the applicant's genders equitable.
Also, one more piece of description. Yeah, I have another question. So it seemed that the man before me had much more time to ask his question. Oh my, okay. So
The cock is clapping enthusiastic. But are you really sure about that?
My question, I just want to repeat the gentleman over there's question is...
and yeah, I just have a few questions about...
One question later.
Also, one more piece of description. Yeah, I have another question. So it seemed that the man before me had much more time to ask his question. Oh my, okay.
So she can't say that there is a difference between my question is and I have a few questions. He asked a question, then he stepped down. You said I have another question, then people interrupted you, and then you cried sexism. And now you're going to be able to ask another question. Good job. It always works for you, right?
So, also, in the event description, you state that anti-intellectualism and women's studies anti-intellectualism is what we're fighting against as people in the men's rights movement. What does anti-intellectualism mean? Does it mean like the intellect that white men have created and defined over the past 200 years? Yeah, what does it mean?
This is anti-intellectualism at its finest. She's demonstrating anti-intellectualism and answering her own question directly after she asked it. And the reason she thinks like that is because of what she learned in gender studies, and that's exactly what the problem is. What I mean is that she started off by saying that gender studies took in uh, gender and race into question, and now she's using somebody's gender and race in order to discredit intellectualism. Bringing up someone's race or gender where it isn't relevant is toxic, and that is anti-intellectualism.
Well, I think it's precisely that kind of heated claim that intellect is something that men have defined, that women have a different sort of intellect, and that emotion should be more valued, or that sort of thing. I mean, that is precisely what I see as anti-intellectual. I think intellectual has a very clear meaning. It has to do with reason, it has to do with logic, it has to do with weighing evidence, it has to do with considering all perspectives. That's all I'm calling for.
So like empirical evidence, like women comprising 25% of parliament when they're 50% of the population.
Yeah.
That is because of women's own choices. Less women are interested in those careers because men and women have different brains that are hardwired differently.
There's a difference between equality of opportunity and equality of result. This is... If you wanted to do a study of why there aren't 50% of women in the House of Commons, you could find all sorts of very interesting evidence. Many women don't want that particular career for a variety of reasons. There is no actual barrier in terms of discrimination against a woman deciding she wants to be a politician.
Oh, and just to add, there is even easier for women to get into politics because of quotation, so the truth is opposite of her beliefs.
Constructive point. I will end with the next video. It's a constructive point. So something that the men's rights movement doesn't address is the psychosocial conditioning of both women and men.
I believe they're just busy with basic human rights and legal rights. Because women have more human rights and legal rights in Canada. That's unfair.
And how that impacts, for example, women's decision to enter politics.
The reason as to why they don't talk about why women aren't going into politics is not because they don't recognize that there might be social factors to it, it's because they are interested in men, just like women's rights movements and feminism are interested in women. This really isn't so complicated. Even most feminists who have spoken on this agrees with me.
And just on a last note, to the woman who was speaking before, she prefaced her statement that she's surprised as to the amount that violence is centered in women's studies with the statement, I've never taken a women's studies course before. Well, as someone who's taken plenty of women's studies courses, I can tell you that violence is not the center of women's studies.
Okay, thank you.
I can't prove that either way, but as most people who say that misgendering or disagreement and threats are in somehow violence, that words are violent, have usually taken a gender studies class. So I think there might be something to that.
First off, I want to thank you for confirming for me why I'm pursuing a graduate degree in women and gender studies. I was really intrigued by your talk, especially as you went through the course description, which were exactly what you called it, speculative.
The reason why she said it is speculative is soon going to be confirmed by the woman talking. Trust me.
You know very little about the course from the description, and instead you literally made assumptions about the details of the course, and they were certainly constructed through your anti-women's studies lens.
What could even anti-women's studies lens mean? I mean, like, if you have a women's studies lens, you see everything from your crazy ideology. But how can you see something in a lens of opposition? I'm sorry, but I really don't understand how this will work practically, and someone really needs to explain this to me.
So my question for you, I want to ask you how you would address claims against your stance on women and gender studies as not only homogenizing of the discipline and those within it, some of whom don't even identify as feminists.
This is very true. Some people who have taken a women's studies class are of the opinion that men can't be feminists, only ally themselves with feminism, so they call themselves pro-feminist instead. Another ideology that's been taught as an objective truth in gender studies would be regressivism.
But also homogenizing of men and power, and men and the ways that women in gender studies talk about power.
I would not object to that claim, but is there any discipline in gender studies that doesn't suggest that men have unanimously power in society over women?
And I also really want to urge you to get a better understanding of intersectionality.
Intersectionality dubs intersectional theory, and intersectional theory is incorrect. The idea that women are always more oppressed on every intersecting identity they consider to be marginalized is simply incorrect. I've already described that when I talked about homosexuals, ethnic minorities, and disabled people. Intersectional theory does not accurately represent reality, and intersectionality has never been objectively proven and can easily be disproved. So in order to believe in it, you have to speculate and make assumptions in order to believe in its legitimacy. Intersectional theory is what is speculative. I told her she was going to confirm what is speculative. Feminist Christina Hofsummers have even described intersectionality as a conspiracy theory. If conspiracy theories aren't speculative, then I really don't know what is.
Which emerges from women of color, many who identify as feminists or womanists, and their critique of white feminists. So,
Okay, thanks. I would say that yes, of course, my discussion was to a certain extent speculative. I would be very interested to discover a course that actually contradicted my claims. And of course I was generalizing. There are women working in women's studies who do fantastic scholarship. I wouldn't deny that. My point is that when there are those cases, they're almost secondary and they're surprising. When you have a discipline that is primarily ideological, it doesn't tend to produce that kind of open-minded, objective scholarship. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm saying that it's surprising when it does.
How do you think, or what effect do you think this dialogue of children need their father, what effect do you think that this dialogue is going to have on particularly lesbian couples who want to have children?
There is a certain difference between having a mother and a father right from the get-go and having your daddy removed from your life against his will, and having two mothers right from the start. The issue here is the former. Having men's children kidnapped against their will actually fucks up the children badly, and stealing his income both by the state. That is the meaning behind children need their fathers. Children with lesbian mothers who have that child together have nothing to do with it at all. It seems like you're only bringing it up because of their feelings. But honestly, what is more important here? Kidnapping or hurt feelings? These people are prioritizing kidnapping, and honestly, no one is suggesting that lesbians shouldn't be allowed to have their own families. By the way, feminists have claimed that fathers are necessary since the 70s. I think that might have a negative effect on gay male couples who want to have children. But who am I kidding? You don't care. Because it doesn't affect women more, right?
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, I hadn't really thought about it in those terms, but I suppose it...
Because it is irrelevant to the question. She's deflecting by bringing this up in order to prevent this important discussion from being held in the first place.
It creates
It
a challenge
reinforces
for
heteronormativity.
Yeah.
Is what it does.
You want to talk about heteronormativity? Let's talk about heteronormativity. Feminists have been pushing for legislation to make it illegal for women to carry children for gay couples, mainly in Europe, and are working to block progress for gay men's right to have their own biological children. This is forcing me to leave the EU-controlled land just because I happen to be a gay man. Your feminist ideology is what is heteronormative. Oh, and as I said before, this is a problem that only affects gay men and not lesbian. So we shouldn't be allowed to talk about it if feminists have a say in it. Because it can't be solved if you approach it in a gynocentric matter, which you have to according to intersectional theory, who claims that women of every demographic have it worse than men, so we have to ignore what primarily affects gay men, as I said before.
There's been a great deal of research that has actually shown that children do better with a mother and a father. So, I mean, if that...
Absolutely atrocious, and it is not true.
Empirically true.
Back it up. I want a citation. I want a citation right now.
Back it up.
We got
Show me
time
where
for
you
4
saw
more
the
questions,
study.
please. We've only got so much longer in the...
Not to ignore that she have no desire to remove the options for anyone to have their own children. Unlike feminists, let us just go over the studies she cited. 2 studies released Sunday, my act-like breaks on a popular social science assertions that gay parents are the same as or maybe better than married mother-father parents. You can see a very important detail. The study compare married mother-father parents to gay parents. Important keyword, married. Single parenthood is not counted for. Remember this detail for later. The empirical claim that no notable differences exist must go. Mark Regnerus, a sociology professor at the University of Texas at Austin, said in his study in social science research, using a new gold standard data set of nearly 3,000 randomly selected American young adults, Mr. Regnerus looked at their lives on 40 measures of social, emotional, and relationship outcome. He found that when compared with adults raised in married mother-father families, adults raised by lesbian mother had negative outcomes in 24 of 40 categories, while adults raised by gay fathers had negative outcomes in 19 categories. As you can see, lesbian mothers gave negative outcome in the majority, while gay dads gave negative outcome in the minority. Then, if you take gay parents in general, you will have negative outcome in the majority, granted. But the small difference of only 5 categories could make the difference between the majority and minorities. Explains how statistics can easily be skewed. Kinda reminds me of what feminists used to do. Findings such as these do not support claims that there are no differences between gay parenting and heterosexual married parents, said Regnerus, who helped develop the new family structures study at the university. Instead, children appear most apt to succeed as well as adults when they spend their entire childhood with their married mother and father, especially when the parents remained married to the present day. Also again, married mother and father. Mr. Regner's study of 2,988 persons ages 18 to 39 including 175 adults raised by lesbian mothers and 73 adults raised by gay fathers. It marks at first research from the new dataset, which initially included some 15,000 persons. Well, it is kind of difficult to compare a very small demographic with a much larger. One can even see that there are more than twice as many lesbians as gay dads. Most people weren't raised by gay couples, by a long shot. The disparity might be the result of being a minority and not being accepted by large in society. I'm not saying that gay parents aren't accepted in today's society at large, but this study is mentioning adults, not people currently being raised by homosexual parents, and feminists calling gay dads oppressors of women, and are encouraging lesbian mothers to hate men, which could include their sons, isn't really helping the children of gay parents, by the way. The second study, also in social science research, take a critical look at the basis of an oft-cited American Psychological Association (APA) report on gay parenting. The APA brief says not a single study has found children of lesbian or gay parents to be disadvantaged in any significant respect relative to children of heterosexual parents, said Lauren Marks, associate professor at the School of Human Ecology at Louisiana State University. Damn, that was difficult to pronounce. But could anybody see what's missing? Did you catch it? I can play it again. Not a single study has found children of lesbian or gay parents to be disadvantaged in any significant respect relative to children of heterosexual parents. They aren't talking about married heterosexual couples now, but heterosexual parents in general. Very important distinction. However, after looking at the 59 studies that undergird the assertion, the jury is still out, Mr. Marks said. The lack of high-quality data leaves the most significant question about gay parenting unaddressed and unanswered. Problems with the APA-cited studies were the tiny size, dependence on wealthy, white, well-educated lesbian mothers, and a failure to examine common outcomes for children such as their education, employment, and risk for poverty, criminality, early childbearing, substance abuse, and suicide. Instead, the APA studies often looked at children's gender role behavior, emotional functioning, and sexual identity. An APA spokesman could not immediately reach for comment. However, Mr. Marks' findings have been preserved previously in gay marriage lawsuits on behalf of arguing in favor of traditional marriage, and critics noted that Mr. Marks' paper had not been published yet and that he was not an expert on gay families. Something I don't get with the whole traditional versus gay marriage is that if a heterosexual couple raise their children with the SJW mindset and indoctrinate their child into belief in more than two genders, wage gap, borders equals racism, and more, compared to a gay couple who raised the child with a very traditional mindset, with the only exceptions being the gender of the parents staying home. That's even more traditional than stay-at-home dads in a heterosexual family. Jennifer Chrysler, executive director of the Family Equality Council, decided to comment on the studies, which she had not seen, but she was confident they could not counteract the very deep and rich body of research that has been concluded over the last 30 years that shows that children raised by gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender mothers and fathers do equally as well as their counterparts raised by heterosexual couples. Why would anyone bring up transgenderism? That is not a sexuality, nor have it anything to do with sexuality. So trans people are irrelevant to the discussion. To clarify, transgenderism have literally no connection to homosexuality at all. Dropping trans people in the same category as homosexuals makes no sense whatsoever. She could just as well have said gay, lesbian, bisexual, and Ferrari owning mother and fathers. To even suggest putting those characteristics in the same category greatly damages the credibility of anyone doing so. And I can tell you anecdotally that given the thousands of families that I spend time with on a regular basis, that what happens in their lives bears out and confirms everything that we need in the research in terms of the positive outcomes of these kids, said Miss Chrysler, who is raising twin sons with her wife, Cheryl Jacks. Earlier this year, Michael E. Lamb, a University of Cambridge scholar who has testified on behalf of gay parenting in same-sex marriage lawsuits, asserted in a study that neither family structure nor having one's biological mother and father in the home is necessary for healthy child adjustment. It's not necessary, only beneficial. Something being necessary means that you need it. There are people out there who had a very healthy child adjustment, who had divorced parents, or was adopted, or had gay parents. If it was a necessity to have both your biological mother and father, then adoption nor divorce would be accepted. As adoption and divorce are both accepted, then gay parenthood should be accepted as well. Gay parenthood would even be better than adoption because the kids would at least have one biological parent, and having your two biological parents is the perfect scenario, but it's not the only workable scenario. So when he says that having one's biological mother and father isn't a necessity, he's not really saying much at all. I mean, like, only because you don't need it doesn't mean it's the best case scenario. Having your married biological parents is the best case scenario, but that doesn't mean that other types of family structures could produce just as well adjusted children. Available evidence is sufficiently conclusive that children and adolescents being raised by same-sex parents are as likely to be well-adjusted as children and adolescents with heterosexual parents, Mr. Lamb concluded in Applied Developmental Science in April. Researchers should focus on other family issues rather than belabor question that has already been answered, he added. Mr. Regnerus cautioned that his study does not attempt to undermine or affirm arguments about gay rights or link poor adult outcomes solely to gay parenting. There it is! Most people, hashtag not all, use Regnerus as a study aren't doing it to argue against gay parenthood. Unlike feminists usually argue against gay parenthood. However, it should raise the bar for research on gay parenting, especially since it does not rely on snowball samples in which gay parents are recruited in the same places as their gay friends in colleges, said Patrick Fagan, a family and marriage scholar at Family Research Council. The Regnerus study is a gold standard, Mr. Fagan said. And if you can't draw a conclusion from it about casualty, then there is not a snowball's chance in the hell that you can draw a conclusion from those other gay parenting studies, he said. I hope my and their message was clear enough. This article didn't outright say that heterosexual parents give better results than homosexual parents, but rather that married heterosexual couples who raise the children from scratch generally gave better outcome. They also linked another study called Dads, How Important Are They?, who stated that dads were important for children's development, and the window claiming the feminists feel profoundly threatened by the suggestion that fathers are important, explains that the issue here isn't gay parents, but rather stripping children's dads away is bad for upbringing of a child. If I were to be totally honest with you, I would even suggest that gay dads would be preferable to heterosexual parents because mothers can always use the state to kidnap their kids for herself, and having dads would be better than that, and neither of the studies contradicted that. Heterosexual couples are overrepresented in divorce statistics, and heterosexual women initiate 75% of all divorces. Lesbian couples have the highest level of domestic abuse, heterosexual couples are in between, and homosexual male couples have the lowest number of domestic abuse. And if we were to compare heterosexual parenthood with lesbian mothers, gay fathers, single mothers, and single fathers, then having a single mother is generally the worst case scenario. And as heterosexual women are most likely to initiate divorce, if you think about it, having married heterosexual parents is the best case scenario. A heterosexual married woman can basically become a single mother whenever she likes to. So the best case scenario could be turned into the worst case scenario, just if a woman wills it. And statistically, that's not unlikely.
There's no better spectator sport than watching sacred bulls get gored.
So are you.
So thank you. I'm enjoying this greatly. My entree to this subject was due to my activism in the new atheism movement, so-called.
Oh God, pun intended. I have some problems with new atheism. It's too militant for me. I mean, like, I'm agnostic and not an atheist, and I could actually understand anti-theism and new atheism, especially if you look at mass Islamic immigration, because then an attack on religion could be very useful. I also think that the lack of religion could sadly leave out the moral vacuum who has been filled with shit like social justice and feminism and bullshit like that. When I was like upset about something, then I know that I could only talk to religious people I knew, like Catholics and Muslims, because I know that they shared mine and had some moral values that many atheists lack. Like, you shouldn't, for example, butcher unborn children.
About a year ago, there was a schism called Atheism Plus that formed, where the plus meant plus a bunch of feminist tropes that a lot of people felt had nothing to do with atheism.
Because it really doesn't. Atheism Plus was basically and is basically a cult that have just replaced God with feminism and social justice and everything the regressives believe dogmatically. I know a YouTuber by the name of Thy Name is Skepticism did a video where she mentioned this in a very good way, much better than I do now, so I'll probably link that in the description, and you can go and check it out if you want to.
My question is, what do you think it signifies that feminists have taken to co-opt other social movements that are unrelated to feminism?
If a social movement were to advocate on behalf of a special interest group, as I said before with disabled people and black people and homosexual people, then if there are some issues, which there are many, of this special interest group that affects men more than it affects the women. And when those groups have a gender-blind approach, the feminists have a problem with that, because they only want to address what happens to women. Because feminists believe that women have it always worse than men. So they're going to do this movement, make it all about women, and therefore, when they have advocacy, it will leave the men behind because it ignores the male-specific issues of these people and only focusing once affecting women more, or only focus on the issues that affect the general group. So therefore the men of those interest groups are left behind and then called privileged, even though they are disabled or homosexual. Well, I wouldn't say that black people are oppressed, but if you think about the disadvantages of being black, I would say it's more of those if you are a man.
For that.
Well, just as in the case of Warren Farrell's talk, which many people wanted to shut down, because he seemed to me, because he was talking about boys and men. Too often, feminism wants to be the entire story, and the thought that attention might be devoted to men's issues is obviously disturbing to feminists. So I think when you believe that you are a righteous victim, you're not interested in anyone else's perspective if it challenges yours. That's my perspective on it.
Hello, I just want to point out two things. First, that everything is ideology, and if you think your ideology is not an ideology, then you are mistaken.
Ideology is a comprehensive set of normative beliefs, consciousness, and unconscious ideas that an individual, group, or society has. Political ideologies have two dimensions. One, goals, how society should work. Two, methods, the most appropriate ways to achieve the ideal agreement. Ideology can easily be broken down into three basic concepts that makes up an ideology: theory, execution, and goal.
And number two is, I have a problem with the form of how the presentation was given, in that usually when you want to critique something, you give it the best argument possible before you never went at what is feminism, all the different like if any preliminary study into feminism would see the intersectionalities, the disagreements between feminism, that feminism isn't one whole unitary thing.
Nay fault. This argument is counterproductive. Now you are just rendering feminism so murky that every argument against feminism results in a hand-way off by saying, that's not all of feminism. I know, and I don't care. If feminism does something damaging to society at large, I'll oppose the ideology regardless of the different versions of ideologies. For example, if a feminist opposes the Duluth model, then I would say great, good for you, I agree with you. If all feminists were like that particular feminist, then I would probably think a lot better of feminism. But feminism holds to the Duluth model, even though not every version of feminism does. And feminism has been damaging to society, and therefore I'm opposed to feminism. Not all versions of feminism, but I'm still opposed to feminism in general, because that's how feminists affect society.
And the problem I have with this is basically you just went out and you started ranting against this concept that was illy defined in the first place, and then
Is there a form of feminism that doesn't hold to the idea that all cultures are patriarchies?
Yeah, there are.
yeah, that's patriarchy was one form of feminism, but the problem is that within feminism, there's like postmodern feminism, there's like radical feminism, there's like liberal feminism, and you know, there's so many different types of feminism.
Which is the form of feminism that doesn't hold that all cultures are patriarchy?
Well, my point was that you never even.
It's for discussion.
The question was why was it not the case that you gave the other side of the argument, like you're supposed to give the strongest argument that's possible and then take it down, not give like a weak argument and then punch it.
Well, I take your point, but my point
it's called a straw man. Like,
I wasn't interested in all of the different forms of feminism. I can talk to you about them if you want, but my point is that every form of feminism is based on an ideological agenda and based on an ideological supposition about patriarchy that I think is wrong. So that's all.
Just to tie the two points together, I think that every argument has a political utility, and I think that your arguments also have some sort of political utility, maintaining some sort of ideology as well.
But then your argument is also the argument.
Yeah, but I agree with it.
What do you say? Then nothing is a value.
Yes, hello. This isn't the last question, is it? No pressure, no pressure. So I just got a question for you. I noticed that you started the whole thing with, regardless of cheek or tongue, it was kind of putting men back in their gender roles. Isn't that what feminism kind of wants to get away from, is putting people in gender roles?
Gender roles? Like male abuser and female victim? The loofah anyone? Just a piece of legal system who presumes men as the aggressor of every single domestic abuse situation? That was implemented by feminists.
And the gentleman left. Heidi, you talk about the legal system and how men don't get access to their children. Totally agree. But wouldn't you say that's because society makes women nurturers?
Correct. Men aren't allowed to be the nurturing parent. That is punishable by law because of the tender years doctrine. Another piece of feminist legislation who made women the presumed caregiver of children by law in the case of divorce.
So aren't we looking at that? You're framing it like there's no patriarchy, but there absolutely is.
Two legal issues implemented by feminism is the work of patriarchy, apparently. So feminism is needed to get rid of the patriarchal constructs, and the things you mentioned as patriarchal constructs exist in society because feminists, who are the ones who get rid of the patriarchy, implemented those into law.
What's legal action? One opposed equal share parenting, the feminist organization.
My question is, though, don't we look in society as women as nurturers? So wouldn't that have to do with why they get custody of the children?
Well, if men can have their children taken away from them at any time by a sexist legal system, they can't really be nurturing stay-at-home dads because they will need a financial security to support their children they may never get to see in order to avoid going to jail because of aggressive child support laws implemented by feminists.
Oh, I totally agree with you, but that's not society's view on things, is it?
No. Society is simply made up of people, so if many people see it that way, it is how society sees it. I could not make out what he said, but that's how it is. This is nonsensical. How does one even determine the society's view on something? How do you know that? Through average attitudes? Then how is that measured? Through survey? When 51% of a society see it one way, it's society's viewpoint? While if 49% see it that way, it's not? It's difficult to generalize society's attitudes and opinions, sort of because those tend to change, and if one society is very individualistic and diverse, that society's general viewpoints tend to be very limited because they have diverse thought. So to say society sees it this way, it's not a good argument. Doesn't really make sense. So just look stupid.
The problem is men are not being allowed to nurture their children.
Why?
That's the problem.
Why?
You see there is a problem with this? You can't skip ahead without solving the core issue. Now let me elaborate. Men technically won't be allowed to be caregivers as long as sexist divorcement is basically law. If they do, they will be sent to jail because of the lack of money. Of course not all, but it's still a risk that they have to take into account. You can't just disregard it without changing the law that were created by feminists, as I just mentioned.
Why do you think this though? If you're not talking about patriarchy.
Well, it's certainly not the men who have been lobbying and who have been asking for the opportunity to be nurturers. It is the feminist legal scholars who propound this idea that women are the primary caregivers.
Feminists, or you're saying feminists want to be put into that gender role that they're just nurturers? Is that what you're trying to? Thank you.
It's been activism on the part of feminists that has created the legal situation that we're in now, in which fathers can't have access to their children and can't nurture.
Last question, sir. This is the last question. Just a little bit of background for me. I have 2 little girls.
The last question is going to confirm everything I've been telling.
I started in court when they were 2 and 3. I had to take it all the way to a 12-day trial where I had to self-represent myself because my lawyer told me I was going to lose. And she told my parents, who were helping me fund my legal fees, that I was going to lose.
I sincerely hope that his stupid lawyer wasn't funded by tax dollar, because that would be an utterly failure and waste of money. Having to pay someone to represent someone in court who won't do it is just fucking useless. I'm feeling a little bit sick right now.
I had to take it to court for 12 days to maintain equal shared parenting, which is what I thought was what was best for our children. And in the end, what the judge thought. But I had to educate myself for over a year and a half on legal terms, on reading about law, on reading about what's in the best interest of children. There should be an automatic presumption. When a child loses its family in a divorce or separation, they should not lose a parent. My question is this. In my travels of trying to find a support system because I was a victim of financial abuse, and I was the higher breadwinner, but I was the victim of financial abuse, I was the victim of verbal abuse, I was the victim. Why doesn't the government fund programs for men getting through this stuff? And how do we go about suggesting to the government to start equal funding for these programs? There is a program in Peterborough called Peaceful Families. That was my question.
Yeah, you need to organize, that's it. And I think organizations like CAFE are about giving a voice to precisely men like yourself who have those concerns. That's all I can say. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody. So we don't have any more time. We're only allowed to have the theater for so long, and we've run out of time. Sorry about the people that couldn't ask questions.
It's always funny seeing feminists disproving their own points right after they're stating them.